Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Leading Through a Crisis series. I just want to cover a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Dr. Natofsky. Everyone is on mute until we the Q&A session of this webinar, of this event. So if you have any questions, please, I encourage you to use the chat box. Insert your questions in the chat box and we'll get to it at the end of the event when Margie's finished with her presentation. And I encourage you guys also to connect with each other through the chat box by entering your contact information for if you have any links or ideas to share. Anyone on this event will be able to reach out to you. If you are viewing this on the live stream, please go ahead and enter any questions you have on there. We will be looking out on the Facebook live stream for questions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Natofsky.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Ahmad. I'm Dr. Jason Natofsky, and somewhere out there, I think we're joined by our 501c3 chair, the amazing Elise Wilson. But we are so excited to have everyone join for our second of our four-part Zoom series of Leading Through Crisis, brought to you by Strategy Solutions. This morning, our second session, we will be discussing cash now fundraising strategies during crisis. Obviously, an incredibly appropriate and relevant topic during these times. And we're so grateful to be joined by our expert from Strategy Solutions, Margie Taylor. Margie has extensive experience in fundraising, economic development, public relations, and communications. And while Margie is still retired, she continues to be committed to the greater good and the power of nonprofits to help improve people's lives. We are so over the moon that the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber has partnered with us to help provide these incredible info sessions with the timing allowing for this to be so essential. So as always, this is being live streamed on the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber's Facebook page, as well as recorded for the purposes of being able to share it internally with your organization and those who are involved with your organization, which is so great. And at the very end of the presentation, just like Ahmad said, there's going to be a Q&A session. We have from 10 a.m. to 11, so I don't want to take too much more time, but you can put your questions in the chat bar, just like you said. And lastly, again, as we become more proficient when using our Zoom platforms throughout these times, let's just make sure we're on mute. I know I have a lot of background noise in the dental office. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Margie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason, and I'm pleased to be here. As he said, I have some experience in fundraising, about 30 years. And in fact, as this pandemic was starting to exert terrific harm on the nation and the world, I went back to my beginnings and remembered that I started my fundraising in really a crisis time for a women's liberal arts college in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. So this, unfortunately, is happening to our nation and the world, but there are lessons that we've learned over time from not only my experience, but other crises that have continued throughout the world. I'm trying to get to my second slide. Ahmed, this is not moving.
I can control the slide share. I'm going to request control if you can just give me the permission.
Sorry about that, folks.
All right, so now just go ahead and click play your slide and you should have full control of that again. Right above the home tab, click on the icon that allows you to play the slideshow.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. We at Strategy Solutions really look at the entire community, and we look at the private sector, as you can see, community and government, and social services. I joined the organization after I retired from Penn State in 2017. And it's a 20-year-old company with lots of experience throughout the nation. As we know, the world has changed, and I wanted to share this quote with you. Our economy is in bad shape and will only get worse. So what can we fundraisers do to minimize the impact of this difficult period on our organizations and at the same time maximize our income? That came from the Stanford Review, and I use it because this quote was actually said in 2009. And at 2008, 2009 was the time of the Great Recession. And we felt at that time that people had lost millions and millions of dollars. The recession affected the world. And as fundraisers, we thought, how are we going to do? How are we going to continue? And in fact, we came out of that recession and came out stronger from that recession and continue to do the good work that we do. Again, there you go. In a crisis, the tendency is to do everything but raise money. And you may have had that initial reaction to the pandemic as it came in from Seattle, from the West Coast to the East Coast. We tend to spend a lot of time doing things that perhaps don't raise money, don't raise cash. There certainly was a great deal of reorganization to do with our organizations, but this particular webinar will focus on raising money and finding cash for your organization. Pick up the phone. Focus on picking up the phone. Many of your donors are probably older individuals. They are not necessarily computer savvy, tech savvy. I remember the second or third week into this crisis, I had a call from the YMCA. I wasn't expecting it. They just wanted to know how I was doing. They let me know what it is that they're doing to keep the Y functioning and active during this time. They asked how we were coping, how I was coping. And I would like you, as you're talking to the donor, listen to ways that you might be able to help them. This is an experience that none of us have had in the past, and you may be able to provide some support or some information to the donor that you may not necessarily have thought about previously. I suggest that you have a script, and a script doesn't have to be extensive. You have 2 or 3 points that you want to make. And you make them as appropriate with the donor based on what you're hearing from the donor. Share your situation, that's part of the script. How are you continuing to cope? Your organization continuing to cope, to serve your clients? How are you adopting new technologies? The emphasis is what you are doing, not what you can't do. How you're helping your community, how you're helping your clients, how you're being successful in this. Share a particular success story, how your group is helping. Northwestern Pennsylvania Public Broadcasting, they were able to work with the county executive there, and she did her update from WQLN. And WQLN, the broadcast station there, shared it with every other broadcast media there in Northwestern Pennsylvania. And so sharing that information, sharing their success story of using their technology and their reach in a 9-county area as well as Southern Ontario, with the most relevant information from the county executive, was really a great service in that region. I suggest that you emphasize your resilience in this time, how the next steps that you've identified to date, and really now that we're 3-4 months in, you have next steps identified, and thank them on behalf of your clients. If you have solicitations in progress, I suggest that you ask your donor how he or she wants to proceed. And again, you've been working with your donor prior to the pandemic. You have a solicitation in progress. They may have a proposal. They may have some documents that you have worked on, whether it's a statement of intent. How do they want to proceed? Do you want to continue with our discussion? Do you want to postpone it? And what I would suggest is that you go in with a postponement based on what you hear on perhaps a month, 2 months. When may I call you? Schedule a follow-up call. If the donor wants to continue to proceed with the discussions, then go ahead. There may be an opportunity here for you to discuss with the donor a solicitation and how it might change, how it might morph into something that better serves the community than what the original solicitation was. If the solicitation was for a piece of equipment that perhaps your organization doesn't need as much now, consider the solicitation that devising that solicitation and editing that solicitation so it's more in line with what your organization needs. You know the donor well enough. If you solicited the donor, you know the donor well enough to engage in this conversation, and you will hear from the donor, particularly in a phone call. You'll be able to hear the inclinations, what they might want to continue doing. You want to acknowledge your generosity if they're going to continue it, determine how the gift will be made. There are opportunities with stocks and other things to continue to make that gift. If the donor can't commit, ask about other ways they may be able to help your nonprofit. There are, as you know, your donors are often your best advocates and ambassadors to the community. Are there other individuals that they can talk to? Can they share the message? Can they share your success stories on how you're doing well, or some of the challenges that you're facing as a nonprofit in your area? And ask them if they can't perhaps do this now, do the gift now. Can they make phone calls? Can they continue to share your mission? If they can't make the gift now, thank them for their support and ask again as other ways that they can be helpful. Repurposing existing donor gifts. Again, if you have a proposal, an existing gift, let me say an existing gift, and you don't, and there's a better use for that gift, call the donor and ask if you can repurpose that gift. Lessen restrictions. Allow you to be able to use the gift for other functions. And get this in writing, get this, confirm if indeed they allow this, confirm that via an email. So you have some documentation that they're allowing the gift to repurpose. If you're looking at a 3-year pledge or a pledge, ask to use the funds for your immediate needs. Donors understand that that situation have changed in Luzerne County and other counties, and they would be I think many of them are very responsive to this particular ask. And again, as I said, document this via email. You do have a rapid response fund. I looked at the Luzerne County Community Foundation. You may not be in a position where the grants don't appear relevant to the mission of your organization. But what you need to do is to tie the mission of your organization to the priorities of a rapid response fund. So take a look at what they are, think broadly about the mission of your organization, perhaps how you're partnering with another nonprofit in your region, so that you could look at how you might qualify for the rapid response funds. I also suggest that you collaborate with other organizations that are well positioned to receive these funds. It is not unusual to collaborate anyhow, but there may be an opportunity to look with United Way or another organization that you could put in a joint grant or a collaborative grant for the rapid response funds. Again, we talk about grants not now relative, ask to use those for current needs, and advocate for foundations. Many foundations are releasing more than the minimum 5% of their distribution. And when you approach foundations, that you don't necessarily need to ask them that, but in your discussions with your board members and others, many nonprofits are encouraging foundations to do more than the 5% that they're normally supposed to do. An estate gift. If you have an estate gift booked with a donor, ask your donor if he or she will early activate the estate gift. And what this means is, does the donor have the opportunity to give you a gift of $5,000, of $10,000 to early activate what the donor wanted to do, wanted to achieve with their estate gift? Now, again, you're going to make that phone call anyhow. You could move into the question of the estate gift. If the estate gift is, again, for something that you're not necessarily going to need in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, you want to discuss with the donor perhaps revising what the estate gift would do in terms of your gift agreement. But it's not unusual with donors who make estate gifts to your nonprofit organization. They have a degree of sophistication. So for you to talk to them about repurposing the estate gift or early activating the estate gift is not necessarily a stretch. This is something they might be familiar with, and it's not out of line to go down that particular road. Any donor that has provided funds to you through a donor advised fund, again, I would very much suggest that you call these donors and encourage them to continue to recommend your nonprofit for donor advised funds. If you make a phone call and you get an answering machine, leave a message, you're planting a seed. You can follow that up with an email to these individuals or these groups, and again, ask for donor advised funds. As you know, there's a great deal of money given to donor advised funds in the last 10 plus years. Again, you want to make your case for support for those donors to advocate on your nonprofit's behalf. Pledge payments. You have an organization, an individual who has agreed to a 3 or 5 year pledge payment for your organization. Again, with this phone call, you want to have a script for the discussion with this donor and discuss the use and the likelihood of the timeline. Are they able to continue the next 3 years? Are they able to meet that? Can they accelerate the payments? If they're doing a $25,000 gift, $5,000 a year for the next 5 years, are they in a position to do perhaps $10,000 this year, $10,000 the next year, $5,000 the year after that? Understand that individuals who are very wealthy are perhaps not affected as much as other individuals during the stock market or during the losses during this pandemic. They may be able, with various techniques, to accelerate payments, or if they want to defer payments, perhaps nothing this year until they see where they are in terms of their assets, $5,000 next year, $10,000 the next year, et cetera. And again, you want to document this via email that you've had this discussion with the donor, and these are the next steps that you see. Again, can they make partial payments, even if it's $1,000, $2,000? You certainly want to encourage that if your discussion with the donor leads to that, gives you a sense that they may be able to continue that. If not, then thank them and try to develop a schedule that can be useful to the donor. The Charitable IRA Rollover. Now, the CARES Act is allowing individuals 70 and a half and above to defer their charitable IRA rollover for this year. But again, many individuals may not need to do that, particularly your wealthy donors. I would check in, I would talk to your donors about this possibility and see if they would consider your organization for the rollover, or if they have in the past, to keep your organization in their charitable IRA rollover funding. Again, you want to go back to that script and the points that you're making to your donors, the most persuasive points you're making to your donors in terms of how your organization is supporting your region during this pandemic. Financing. If you happen to have existing loans for your nonprofit, certainly this is the time to negotiate lower interest rates or a moratorium on payments or longer terms. Many nonprofits don't have this, but if you do, certainly I think banks would be receptive to this because they are as much invested in your community, particularly regional banks are invested in your community and want to see you succeed. Review your assets as collateral. Again, this has to be done with your legal counsel, your board of directors for any kind of consideration, proposals, approvals. But are there assets that you have that could be a collateral for a loan? Will a donor consider a loan? This isn't unusual. Given interest rates right now, 0, 1%, 2%, there are ways that a donor can consider a loan for your organization. You need to work with your legal counsel on this, but the donor could give you an interest rate of 0, 1, 2% as you look at this. And there may be some loan forgiveness involved in there. Again, the donor will need to check with her legal counsel as well, and you need to seek legal advice on this as well. But it is being done. When you look at your assets, are there assets that you have that you don't need anymore or won't be needing the next 5 or 10 years? I put in there Persian rugs because when I was at Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania years ago, the college, we needed to raise $1 million a year, each and every year in our annual fund. This was in the 1980s. And part of that was certainly looking at assets that the college had that they would not need. The college happened to have a collection of Persian rugs that were purchased in the 1890s or donated in the 1890s, the early 1900s. And the president of the college decided that we could take these, or she had them assessed, and they were taken to Christie's and sold and generated significant income for the college. So think outside the box. Are there any assets that you have? Now, if the donor is still with us, in terms of the assets, you want to work with the donor and getting permission to sell these assets. If there's a gift agreement associated with these assets, then you want to refer to the gift agreement. But any assets that you want to consider, again, this is a strategy you're going to want to talk to your board of directors about to see if this is something that you might be able to use. Virtual events, annual appeals, many of us are encouraging online donations. Many individuals, many nonprofits are very successful at doing this. Americans want to give. Individuals want to give. They may not be able to give at the existing levels that they gave or levels that they gave last year. They may want some time to assess where they are, but there are tax implications in the CARES Act that allows them to take charitable deductions for more than what perhaps they had last year. And put your volunteers to work. Volunteers should be making, and members of your board should be making phone calls, not only to your major donors, your major prospects, but also look at online, those who have given online donations, say every year for the past 5 years. Let's say they're at $1,000 a year. If you have a volunteer who has time to make phone calls on your behalf, perhaps 1 call a day, 2 calls a day, you help them with a script. If the individual is not taking phone calls and you leave a message, you could also do this with emails as well, particularly with younger donors. Reports on high net worth American donors reveal that the #1 reason donors stop giving to a particular charity was that they no longer feel connected to the organization. You need to create those connections, particularly now at this time, and keep those connections in line with your organization. I remember I give to public broadcasting, and I was wondering how public broadcasting was responding to COVID, to the pandemic. You know, they're not necessarily serving the top 3 needs that have been identified by many of these emergency relief funds. But as I mentioned, public broadcasting provided a very significant service in terms of news and information for the region. And we need to continue to stay connected to the donors who support our organization. Donors will support your nonprofit if you ask. We learned many lessons, not only from the recession, from 9/11, at Penn State, from the Sandusky scandal. Donors understand that they've supported you in the past, and they will continue to support you in the future. You are, however, in a very competitive situation in that many donors are receiving solicitations from national and international organizations, and rightfully so. But my thinking on this is that one of your strengths is that you are staying local. The concept of buying local applies to nonprofits in terms of funding local. You are closest to the situation in your region, you are responsive, you are cost effective, so support your local nonprofit, perhaps rather than giving to a national nonprofit where you never know if the funds are going to ever reach your region. I think that's a very strong case for support for your nonprofit organization. Look at the rapid release criteria, as we talked about, connecting the dots to your organization and your mission, collaborating where you can with an organization that is more widely recognized as responding to COVID, and go where the funding is. Look at where funds are most needed, how you can support that, and again, look at the kinds of proposals that you can look at. Consider mergers and acquisitions. There is research that says that many nonprofits perhaps will not make it through the pandemic. And so that's a reality. And if your nonprofit is on shaky ground, I suggest that you work with your board of directors, you look at stronger nonprofits that are in your region, see if there are synergies that you can develop with those nonprofits. And if that nonprofit has part of your mission or would consider merging, then begin that discussion now. You may look at your community foundation or United Way for assistance with that, but it is something that you may want to consider rather than allowing your mission to lapse or your nonprofit to lapse or close. Consider mergers. I think that's a much stronger way to go about continuing your mission or your missions than allowing your nonprofit to close. I'd like to thank you for your participation today. If you have any questions, we certainly would take them. I'll turn this back to Ahmed.
Thank you, Margie. At this point, everyone, if you have any questions, please go ahead and submit it in the chat box or let us know. We will unmute you for you to share. Margie, I do have a question on my behalf to get you started. Are there any industries out there that you feel thrived, for lack of a better term, during this pandemic that would be more apt to donate to nonprofits?
I suggest that you continue your solicitation of corporations. There is a significant advantage to companies in the CARES Act, tax advantages to companies in the CARES Act that allows them, and again, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a finance individual, but the information indicates that companies are able to go back 1 or 2 years and look at profits and losses and work through those to affect their bottom line. Companies that are local, Ahmad, are more likely to support your organizations, locally based, are looking to support your organization. You are supporting, as a nonprofit, you are supporting their employees and their families by providing services. So look at those that are within your region, that are locally based, have local ownership, or perhaps are Pennsylvania based, and that are looking to support your particular region. I would also look at foundations, obviously, foundations that are in your region, have a northern Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania reach, or a Pennsylvania reach, and look at, and you could do this as a region as well. You could do this through United Way, you could do this through your community foundation, and look at a joint ask. One of the strengths, I think, of mature development programs is that they look at what we call joint ask, and you're developing the proposal with another nonprofit organization, and you're developing a stronger proposal. One of the strengths of working at a university is that there are multiple interests, multiple colleges within a university, not only colleges, but you have athletics, student affairs, and others. So look at the possibility of creating an ask that include multiple nonprofits, and your community foundation, and I think United Way, would be in a position to help you with that. But there are significant advantages to corporations in terms of tax advantages to making donations. Now they've got to work through those finances and those tax laws as well. So I would continue again to plant the seed, those that are supporting you to continue to make that point, to support your organization, and to approach new ones as well.
Thank you. I'm still looking in the chat box. If anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to share. Another question is locally, many of the guests that are attending are part of nonprofits. They also serve on different committees locally here for different nonprofits and make that ask for silent auctions and donations and such. Now that a lot of the small businesses have gone through that the COVID-19 situations and issues, and they're looking to reopen and looking to get back into the swing of things in the community, what approach have you seen or has been used to ask them for a donation for your silent auction event or your raffling event that you've seen successful? Any tips and tricks on that?
Certainly. When approaching a business that has supported you in the past, many of these are gift certificates or products. They still have the products, and the gift certificates are still a possibility. And it's also a marketing tool to encourage people to enter, to buy, to go into that restaurant at a point where it is possible to do that. And that gift certificate can be used, you could put a year or 12 months or 6 months that an individual or a family or a couple can use that particular gift certificate. Certainly products are possible, continue to be strong possibilities, because that product is something the organization, the company has in inventory. So I would look at, for example, I would look at those who currently supported you and ask for that product. And for those that supported you through gift certificates, to continue to do that. Now, look at those products and services that people are looking for, perhaps in addition to what has been important to us in the past. Certainly certificates or gift certificates to Costco, to BJ's, to Giant Foods, perhaps are more important today than they were last year. I think that's an area that you could look at in your region, where people are spending their dollars, people are spending their money. I would diplomatically work with these companies and these businesses, recognizing that they've been affected, but also encouraging them by using the points that you develop, persuasive points that would appeal to them. Many of these businesses need to reposition themselves and to market themselves. And how you are in a position to do that with your audiences is a very important point to help them. You are partnering with these businesses to help them reestablish themselves during the pandemic. So I would go in with those particular points as a partner and looking to continue that particular relationship, and then developing new ones. Again, doing an assessment of what businesses are more important today than they were last year, and you may have not thought of them to support your auction or your events. A number of organizations that I've heard, that I've worked with, nonprofits that I've worked at, really have been very successful with virtual auctions, virtual events. It takes a great deal of work. It takes a shift. If you don't have the expertise to do this, I would call your chamber. I would call Ahmad. I would call United Way, and I would ask them for their advice. There may be a company that is technologically proficient in this that would partner with you in getting you started. There may be colleges and universities there. Students are looking for projects. And I would call the dean's office or the provost's office and have your proposal, have your idea, work with Ahmed and determine what it is that you want to accomplish. Put it in, 3 or 4 paragraphs, and ask the college or university, is there a faculty member and a student group that you could work with to develop this for you, to help develop this technology and this approach for you, because of our inexperience in this. Students need credits, students need experience. This is summer. You could offer $500 to a student group, or $250 or $1,000, whatever your budget would allow. But you're going to get as valuable information, in my opinion, from a student group who's working with a faculty member as you would trying to get through this yourself. Ahmad, would you agree with that? I mean, maybe there are other resources in the region that I'm not thinking of.
No, I think that answers everything. You provided some great points there. I do believe the next session in this focuses on virtual, like going virtual, and strategies for program sustainability. I know locally there have been 2 successful virtual silent auctions online from local nonprofits in the area. And if anybody would love connections to those individuals, we're more than happy to send you their way for any questions you may have on what programs they use. Margie, do you know of any programs that are out there or platforms that are skilled or very, very much so user-friendly for nonprofits to put on silent auctions or virtual events before we get this week, or is that next week?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I don't. My focus has been on major gifts and estate gift and plan gifts, corporate and foundation relations. So the technology for online and virtual gifts and fundraisers of that kind isn't something that I've really been involved in. But you may be able to, address that at your next session. And that's a good question for you, Ahmad, at the chamber, and perhaps for your community foundation. They may have some suggestions on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Margie. Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask Margie before we close out today's program?
I would like to make one point, Ahmad. As we think about this, I'd like to encourage you as a nonprofit, as a CEO, as a staff member, a development officer, to use your power. You have power. I think that nonprofit staff and leaders do not use. And this is the time to exert that power appropriately. There is a tremendous urgency in your region, in every region of the country, to respond, to support, to use philanthropic dollars to help your community rebound and to strengthen your community. Let me give you an example. You're the executive director of a nonprofit. Too often our board of directors are not as active as we like them to be. I would suggest that you, working with your board chairman, that you establish criteria for those board members to do what you want them to do. For example, as you know, I'm an advocate of phone calls or reaching out to donors, corporations, and foundations. I would work with your board chair, and develop assignments for each board member and tell them, we want you to call corporation, foundation, philanthropist, A, B, C, and D. And here's a script that we want you to use. Here are the points that we want you to use. Give them a deadline and set that expectation that they will do this. This is the time that they need to help your nonprofit. This is the time. This is really a very urgent time that they need to help your community and help your nonprofit help your community. So use the power that you have as a development officer, as a CEO, working with your board and your volunteers to have them do what they should be doing on behalf of your nonprofit. Now, you've got to be diplomatic about it, obviously, but use it to your advantage. Use it to help your clients. Too often I see nonprofit executive directors and staff not use that as a tactic. It's a very important tactic, and it's one that is very appropriate today, given the pandemic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Margie. That is an excellent point. And we do all have boards that we can definitely tap into to support our missions. So with that, I think we don't have any other questions. In the chat, someone gave us GiftSmart as a service that provides help with silent actions and such. And it looks like Jason's back on with us to help close us out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Margie, for spending that hour with us and providing the amazing content that we'll definitely all be able to access and share through the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber's Facebook page. On behalf of the Westmoreland Club and the entire 501c3 squad, I wanted to just thank you once again, Strategy Solutions and the Greater Wilkes-Barre Chamber, for their amazing help with this great program. And as a friendly reminder, next week, Wednesday, July 1st, we'll be having our third part of our 4-part series, and the topic will be going virtual, strategies for program sustainability. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time, and I hope that you've enjoyed this hour of your day. We'll see everyone next week. Thank you.
Thank you.